The coffee in Daniel Harper's mug had gone cold an hour ago, but he didn't notice. As captain of the Horizon's Edge, he spent most of his nights reviewing star charts and mission reports. The exploration vessel had been traveling through the outer regions of known space for 3 months now, cataloging new planets and checking on established colonies. It was peaceful work, the kind that let him forget about the chaos humanity had left behind on Earth. Linda Martinez sat at her communications console on the bridge, half listening to the usual static and background noise of space. She had been doing this job for 5 years, and most days nothing interesting happened. Ships would check in, automated beacons would ping their locations, and occasionally someone would send a message about supply deliveries. But tonight felt different somehow. The signal came through at 0347 hours ship time. At first, Linda thought it was just interference from a nearby nebula. The sound was faint, buried under layers of cosmic noise. But then she heard it again, a pattern that repeated every few seconds. Her fingers flew across her console, trying to clean up the signal and boost its strength. "Captain Harper, you need to hear this," Linda said, her voice tight with concern. Daniel set down his cold coffee and walked over to her station. The bridge was quiet at this hour, with only a skeleton crew on duty. Kevin Brooks, their language specialist, was asleep in his quarters. Amy Sullivan had just finished her shift at the navigation console and was heading to bed. Greg Palmer was monitoring the tactical systems from across the bridge. "What have you got?" Daniel asked. Linda played the signal through the speakers. At first it just sounded like random noise, but as she filtered out the interference, voices emerged. They weren't human voices. The pitch was higher, almost musical, and the words were in a language Daniel had never heard before. "Can you identify the source?" he asked. "It's coming from the direction of Refuge Station," Linda replied. "That's the Valari colony about 6 days away at full speed." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The Valari were good people, peaceful and curious. Humanity had made first contact with them 3 years ago, and the relationship had been nothing but positive. They shared their music and art freely, teaching humans about their culture. In return, humans had helped them establish new colonies and shared medical technology. "Wake up, Kevin," Daniel ordered. "I need him to translate this message right now." 20 minutes later, Kevin Brooks stumbled onto the bridge in his sleep clothes, his hair sticking up in odd directions. He grabbed a cup of coffee from the dispenser and sat down at Linda's console, putting on a headset to listen to the signal more clearly. "Play it again from the beginning," Kevin said. As the message repeated, Kevin's expression changed from sleepy confusion to alert concern, then to something darker. He typed notes on his tablet, cross-referencing the words with the Valari language database they had on file. "Well?" Daniel asked after several minutes. Kevin removed his headset and turned to face the captain. His hands were shaking slightly. "It's a distress call," Kevin said quietly. "They're under attack. The message says their station is being destroyed by an unknown enemy. They're calling for help from anyone who can hear them." The bridge went silent. Greg Palmer looked up from his tactical console, his face pale. Linda had stopped her work and was staring at the speakers as if she could will them to say something different. "How old is this message?" Daniel asked. "Based on the signal degradation and distance, I'd say it was sent about 18 hours ago," Linda replied. "But Captain, there's more to it. Let me boost the background audio." She adjusted her controls and suddenly they could hear more than just voices. There were explosions, the sound of metal tearing, and something else that made Daniel's blood run cold. Screaming. The Valari were screaming in pain and fear. "They're describing what's happening," Kevin continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "They say the attackers came without warning, demanded surrender. When the Valari refused, they started firing on civilian sections of the station. They're not just attacking military targets. They're killing everyone." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, thinking. The Valari had no military. They were philosophers and artists, people who spent their time creating beautiful things and studying the universe. They had welcomed humanity with open arms, sharing everything they had without asking for anything in return. And now someone was slaughtering them. "The message ends with a plea," Kevin said. "They're asking for rescue. They say their children are dying." And then the transmission just cuts off. There's an explosion and then nothing. Daniel opened his eyes and looked around the bridge. His crew was watching him, waiting for orders. He knew what he had to do. But the weight of it settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. "Linda, Send an encrypted message to Earth Command immediately. Include everything we've intercepted. Copy forward base Sentinel and any other human military outpost within range. Tell them we have a code black situation at Refuge Station. Yes, sir, Linda said, already working. Amy, I know you just got off shift, but I need you back at navigation. Plot a course for Refuge Station, maximum speed. How long will it take us? Amy Sullivan, who had been listening from the doorway, walked back to her console without hesitation. 6 days, Captain. Maybe 5.5 if we push the engines. Push them, Daniel said. Greg, what do we have in terms of weapons? Greg Palmer looked uncomfortable. We're an exploration ship, sir. We have basic defensive shields and 2 small plasma cannons designed for clearing space debris. Against a real military force, we'd be outgunned. Get Ryan Carter up here. Tell him I need every weapon system we have modified and ready for combat. If we can shoot it, I want it armed and operational. Captain, Kevin said carefully, we don't know who's attacking the station. We don't know how many ships they have or what kind of weapons. This could be a suicide mission. Daniel looked at the younger man and saw his own fear reflected there. But he also saw something else, determination. Kevin wasn't arguing against going. He was just stating facts. I know, Daniel said, but those people called for help. They trusted that someone would hear them and come. I won't let them down. We're going, and we'll do whatever we can when we get there. He turned to address the whole bridge crew. Wake everyone up. Battle stations in 1 hour. I want all departments ready for anything. We're heading into unknown danger, but we're doing it anyway. The Volari are our friends, and friends don't abandon each other. As the crew scattered to carry out his orders, Daniel returned to his chair and stared at the view screen. 6 days. They had 6 days to prepare for whatever was waiting at Refuge Station. 6 days to turn an exploration vessel into something that could fight. 6 days to become the help that the Volari desperately needed. The cold coffee sat forgotten on his armrest as the Horizon's Edge changed course, its engines burning bright as it raced toward the unknown. The journey to Refuge Station felt both endless and too short at the same time. Daniel Harper spent most of those 6 days on the bridge, watching the stars streak past as his ship pushed its engines to the limit. The crew worked around the clock, preparing for whatever they would find when they arrived. Ryan Carter had barely slept. The chief engineer had taken Daniel's orders seriously and transformed every system on the ship that could possibly be weaponized. The mining lasers designed for cutting through asteroids were now mounted on rotating turrets. The cargo bay tractor beams were modified to grab and crush smaller vessels. Even the emergency escape pods had been rigged with proximity mines just in case. It's not much, Ryan admitted when he gave Daniel the final report. Against a real warship, we'd last maybe 10 minutes. But we can hurt them, and that's something. Helen Foster prepared the medical bay for casualties. She requisitioned every spare space on the ship that could be converted into emergency treatment areas. The cargo holds, the recreation rooms, even part of the cafeteria was set up with medical equipment. She hoped she wouldn't need any of it. But hope wasn't a strategy. On the morning of the 6th day, the Horizon's Edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Refuge Station system. What they saw made the crew fall silent. The station hung in space like a broken toy. Huge sections were torn open, venting frozen atmosphere into the void. Debris floated everywhere, pieces of what had once been homes, schools, and gardens. Small fires still burned in some sections, fed by oxygen leaking from ruptured compartments. The beautiful spiral design that the Volari had been so proud of was shattered, barely recognizable. Life signs? Daniel asked quietly. Amy Sullivan worked her console, running scan after scan. Very few, Captain. I'm detecting maybe a dozen Volari signatures scattered across the wreckage. But there's something else. 3 ships holding position on the far side of the station. Unknown configuration. Those must be the attackers, Greg Palmer said from Tactical. They're still here. Daniel leaned forward in his chair. Can you get a better look at them? The view screen zoomed in on the 3 vessels. They were sleek and predatory looking, painted in dark colors that made them hard to see against the backdrop of space. Weapon ports dotted their hulls and their engines glowed with a sickly green light. I'm picking up communications between those ships, Linda Martinez said. Kevin, I'm sending it to your station now. Kevin Brooks listened to the alien transmissions, his face growing darker with each passing moment. He pulled up comparison files, checking the language patterns against everything in their database. After several minutes, he shook his head. It's nothing we've encountered before. A completely new species. but I can pick out a few words based on common linguistic structures. They're calling themselves the Krathiks. And Captain, they're discussing the hunt. The what? Daniel asked. They're treating this like a hunting expedition, Kevin continued, his voice filled with disgust. They're talking about how many targets they eliminated, comparing scores like it's a game. They've been here for 3 weeks, taking their time. This wasn't a military operation. This was sport to them. The bridge crew exchanged glances. Connor Hughes, the rescue specialist who had joined them on the bridge, clenched his fist so hard his knuckles turned white. They killed all these people for fun, Connor asked. That's what it sounds like, Kevin confirmed. And they're planning to stay a few more days to hunt down the remaining survivors. They're in no hurry. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. He had seen violence before, had served in the border conflicts back when humanity was still fighting itself. But this was different. This was calculated cruelty on a scale he had never imagined. Linda, send everything we're seeing and hearing back to Earth Command. Full data burst, all channels. Make sure they know the attackers are still here and still hunting. Already doing it, sir, Linda replied. Amy, take us into that debris field. Use the wreckage for cover. I want us hidden before those Krathiks ships notice we're here. The horizon's edge moved slowly into the expanding cloud of debris, staying in the shadow of larger pieces of the destroyed station. Amy navigated carefully, avoiding chunks of metal that could damage their hull while keeping them concealed from the enemy sensors. Connor, prep a rescue team, Daniel ordered. I'm picking up life signs in Section 7 of the station, about 2 kilometers from our current position. Take Ryan with you and anyone else you need. Get those survivors out. Connor nodded and left the bridge at a run. Within minutes, he had assembled a team and they were boarding one of the ship's shuttles. Equipped with cutting tools and emergency life support equipment, the shuttle launched quietly, using minimal thrust to avoid detection. It drifted through the debris field like just another piece of wreckage, getting closer to the section where the survivors were hiding. On the bridge, Daniel watched the Krathiks ships carefully. They hadn't moved, hadn't shown any sign that they detected the horizon's edge, but he knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. Kevin, keep monitoring their communications. I want to know the moment they realize we're here. An hour passed in tense silence. Then Connor's voice came through on the communications channel. Captain, we've reached the survivors. 12 Valari, mostly injured. We're cutting through to their shelter now. Daniel allowed himself a small breath of relief. Good work. Get them back to the ship as fast as you can. But even as Connor spoke, one of the Krathiks ships began moving. It turned slowly, its sensors sweeping the debris field. They know something's wrong, Greg warned. They're searching for us. Connor, you need to hurry, Daniel said into his communicator. In the damaged section of the station, Connor and his team worked frantically to cut through the twisted metal blocking the survivors' shelter. The Valari inside were huddled together, injured and terrified. When the rescue team finally broke through, one of the Valari, a young female named Sileth, looked at them with eyes full of tears. You came, she whispered in broken English. We called and you came. We'll always come, Connor promised, helping her to her feet. Now let's get you somewhere safe. The rescue team loaded the survivors onto the shuttle and launched back toward the horizon's edge. But the movement attracted attention. One of the Krathiks ships changed course, heading directly toward them. They've spotted the shuttle, Greg called out. Krathiks ship is accelerating. Daniel made his decision in an instant. All power to weapons. Target that ship. Fire when ready. The horizon's edge dropped its camouflage and its modified weapon systems came online. The mining lasers, never designed for combat, fired at full power. The beam struck the Krathiks ship's shields, making them flare bright blue. The enemy ship staggered, surprised by the sudden attack. Its weapons began charging, turning to face this unexpected threat. Shuttle's clear, Amy reported. Connor is almost back. Good, Daniel said grimly. Greg, fire everything we have. Buy them time. The small exploration vessel and the Krathiks warship exchanged fire in the debris field. The horizon's edge was outmatched, its shields weakening with each hit, but it kept firing, kept moving, drawing the enemy away from the shuttle carrying the survivors. Hull breach on deck 3. Ryan's voice came through from engineering. Sealing it now, Daniel gripped his armrest. They had saved 12 lives today, but the cost might be their own ship. And somewhere out there, the other 2 Krathiks vessels were moving to join the fight. The message from the horizon's edge reached Earth Command 48 hours after Daniel Harper sent it. When the encrypted data package decoded, the entire military headquarters went silent. Officers and analysts watched the footage of the destroyed refuge station, listened to the intercepted Krathix communications, and read the survivor testimonies that Connor Hughes had recorded. Admiral Patricia Coleman was in a meeting when her aide interrupted with the urgent message. She dismissed everyone else from the room and watched the entire data package alone. When it finished, she sat in silence for several minutes, her jaw clenched tight. Patricia had served in the military for 30 years. She had fought in 3 major conflicts and countless smaller engagements. She thought she had seen every kind of cruelty that sentient beings could inflict on each other. But this was something new, something that made her blood boil in a way she hadn't felt in years. The Krathix had attacked peaceful civilians. They had turned the destruction of an entire colony into entertainment. They had hunted children for sport. And according to the intelligence Kevin Brooks had gathered, this wasn't their first time. The Krathix Dominion had done this to other species, other worlds, dozens of times over the past century. Patricia picked up her secure communications device and began making calls. Within an hour, every major military commander in human space was in a video conference watching the same footage she had seen. "We need to respond," Patricia said simply, "and we need to respond with overwhelming force." There was no debate, no discussion about whether action was justified. Every person in that conference had the same reaction: fury. Humanity had spent the last century trying to prove they were more than the violent species their history suggested. They had built peace, established trade, reached out to alien civilizations with open hands instead of weapons, but there was a limit to peaceful patience, and the Krathix had found it. Fleet Admiral Nicholas Grant, the highest-ranking military officer in Earth's defense forces, took command of the coordination. "We'll assemble every available ship at Forward Base Sentinel. Admiral Coleman, you'll take operational command of the response fleet. Your objective is simple: eliminate the Krathix presence at Refuge Station, rescue any survivors, and secure the area." "With respect, sir," Patricia replied. "I think our objective should be broader than that." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "The intelligence suggests the Krathix have been doing this for years, to multiple species. If we just drive them away from Refuge Station, they'll attack someone else in 6 months. We need to make sure they never do this again to anyone." The other commanders in the conference began nodding. Someone suggested a full military campaign into Krathix territory. Another proposed sanctions and blockades. But Patricia shook her head. "We need to send a message that every species in this region of space will understand. You don't attack peaceful civilians. You don't turn lives into games. And if you do, humanity will come for you with everything we have." The plan came together quickly. Ships began moving toward Forward Base Sentinel from every corner of human space. Carriers, destroyers, cruisers, support vessels, even some of the older warships that had been scheduled for decommission, were pulled out of mothballs and prepared for deployment. The response was unprecedented in human history. Not since the Unification Wars had so many ships been assembled in one place. But this time they weren't fighting each other. They were united against a common enemy who had committed an unforgivable act. Back at Refuge Station, Daniel Harper was playing a desperate game of survival. The Horizon's Edge darted through the debris field, using every trick Ryan Carter could devise to stay ahead of the Krathix ships. They would hide behind large chunks of the destroyed station, emerge to fire a quick volley, then disappear again before the enemy could respond effectively. "We've destroyed one of their patrol boats," Greg Palmer reported after their third engagement. "But the 2 larger ships are still hunting us, and they're getting better at predicting our movements." Daniel knew they couldn't keep this up forever. Their shields were at 40% strength. They had used most of their makeshift ammunition. Worse, the Krathix commander seemed to have figured out that this wasn't a military vessel, but an exploration ship that was way out of its depth. In the medical bay, Helen Foster worked on the Volari survivors. Most had injuries from the initial attack untreated for weeks. She stabilized the worst cases and treated the others as best she could with the equipment available. The young Volari named Silith stayed by her side, helping translate and comfort the other survivors. "Why did the Krathix do this?" Silith asked Helen while they worked. "We never hurt anyone. We only wanted to live in peace." Helen didn't have a good answer. Some species are predators. They see kindness as weakness. "But you are different," Silith observed. You came to help us even though you knew it was dangerous. The humans I met before were explorers and scientists. But you fight like warriors. We're both, Helen said quietly. We prefer to be explorers and scientists. But when our friends are threatened, we remember how to be warriors. Kevin Brooks continued monitoring Krathik's communications, learning more about their culture and society, with each intercepted message. What he discovered disturbed him deeply. The Krathiks weren't just raiders. They had built their entire civilization around the concept of proving strength through conquest. To them, showing mercy was shameful. Attacking those weaker than yourself was considered honorable. They think we're cowards for hiding, Kevin told Daniel after listening to the latest transmission. The Krathik's commander is mocking us, calling us prey that's too afraid to fight properly. Let him think that, Daniel replied. Every minute we keep them focused on us is another minute for reinforcements to arrive. Linda, any word from Earth Command? I received a response an hour ago, Linda said. It just said hold position. Help is coming. They didn't say when. Daniel hoped it would be soon. The Horizon's Edge couldn't take much more damage. They had lost power to 3 decks, the shields were failing. And Ryan reported that the main engine was developing problems from being pushed so hard for so long. Then, on the morning of the 3rd day of their desperate fight, Amy Sullivan picked up something on long-range sensors. Captain, I'm detecting multiple ships entering the system. A lot of ships. They're broadcasting human identification codes. Daniel felt relief wash over him. How many ships? Amy checked her readings again, not quite believing what she was seeing. 47 vessels, sir. And they're all military. I'm reading carriers, destroyers, and cruisers. This is a full battle fleet. On the bridge view screen, Linda brought up the visual feed. Ship after ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, forming up in battle formation. At the center was a massive carrier, easily 10 times the size of the Horizon's Edge. Its hull was painted with the symbol of Earth's defense forces and bore the name Retribution in letters big enough to read from thousands of kilometers away. Communication came through on all channels. The voice was calm, professional, and absolutely cold. This is Admiral Patricia Coleman of the United Earth Defense Forces to all Krathik's vessels in this system. You have committed acts of war against a peaceful species under human protection. You are ordered to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. You have 5 minutes to comply. Failure to surrender will result in your immediate destruction. On the bridge of the Horizon's Edge, the crew stood in stunned silence. They had asked for help, hoping for maybe a few ships to assist in rescue operations. Instead, Earth had sent an armada. The Krathik's commander responded with mockery and threats, clearly not understanding what he was facing. Patricia Coleman's response was simple. Your time is up. All ships, weapons free. Show them what happens when you hurt our friends. The battle for Refuge Station was about to begin. The Krathik's commander made his final mistake when he decided to fight. Perhaps he thought the human fleet was bluffing. Perhaps his culture wouldn't allow him to surrender without losing honor. Or perhaps he simply couldn't imagine that these newcomers posed a real threat. Whatever his reasoning, when the 5 minutes expired and he fired the first shot at the human fleet, he sealed his fate. The human response was immediate and overwhelming. Admiral Patricia Coleman gave the order from the bridge of the Retribution, and 47 warships opened fire as one. The space around Refuge Station lit up like a small sun. Plasma cannons, rail guns, missile batteries, and laser arrays all fired simultaneously. The Krathik ship's shields flared bright and then shattered under the concentrated assault. Within the first 30 seconds of combat, 2 Krathik's destroyers were reduced to floating debris. On the Horizon's Edge, Daniel Harper and his crew watched in awe. They had been fighting desperately for days against these same ships, barely surviving each encounter. Now they watched as the full might of Earth's military demonstrated what happened when humanity stopped being peaceful explorers and became warriors. Those are the same ships that nearly destroyed us, Greg Palmer said quietly. They're being torn apart like paper. Chris Jensen, the weapons officer aboard the Retribution, coordinated the fleet's fire with cold precision. He had watched the footage of what the Krathiks did to Refuge Station. He had heard the screams of dying Valari. He felt no mercy as he designated targets and authorized firing solutions. Target the command ship's engines first, Patricia ordered. I want prisoners for interrogation. The fleet's weapons shifted focus, disabling the Krathik's flagship rather than destroying it outright. The alien vessel tried to maneuver, tried to return fire, but it was hopeless. Human ships surrounded it from every angle, cutting off escape routes and systematically destroying its weapon systems. Within 6 hours, the battle was over. The Krathix force at Refuge Station had been completely eliminated. 19 enemy ships destroyed, one captured intact with its crew alive for questioning. Not a single human ship was lost. A few had minor damage from lucky Krathix shots, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. The human fleet moved into position around the shattered remains of Refuge Station, securing the area and beginning rescue operations. Connor Hughes led teams from multiple ships, searching every section of the wreckage for survivors. They found 17 more Valari hiding in sealed sections, afraid to come out even after the shooting stopped. Daniel brought the Horizon's Edge alongside the Retribution and was summoned to Admiral Coleman's office. He walked through the massive carrier's corridors, passing Marines and technicians who all seemed to move with purpose and efficiency. This was a military vessel built for war, and it showed in every detail. Patricia Coleman was reviewing tactical reports when Daniel entered. She looked up and gestured for him to sit. "Captain Harper, your actions over the past week have been noted, holding position against superior forces, conducting rescue operations under fire, and providing crucial intelligence about the enemy. Well done. Thank you, Admiral. But we barely survived. If your fleet hadn't arrived when it did," Patricia interrupted him with a slight smile, "you did exactly what you were supposed to do. You answered a distress call, protected civilians, and bought time for reinforcements. That's all anyone could ask." She pulled up a holographic display showing the Krathix territory and the surrounding space. Red markers indicated known Krathix bases and colonies. Blue markers showed the locations of other species that had been attacked by the Krathix in the past. "We've been interrogating the prisoners from the captured Krathix ship," Patricia continued. "What we're learning makes this situation much bigger than just Refuge Station. The Krathix have been raiding peaceful species for decades. They have prisoners, slaves, and tribute systems across half a dozen worlds." Daniel studied the map, his expression darkening. "What are you planning to do?" "We're going to end it," Patricia said simply. "The fleet is dividing into task forces. One group stays here to assist with rebuilding and security. The rest comes with me into Krathix space. We're going to liberate every prisoner, free every slave, and make absolutely certain the Krathix Dominion never threatens anyone again." "That sounds like you're planning to dismantle their entire government." "That's exactly what we're planning," Patricia confirmed. "The Krathix built their society on predation and cruelty. That ends now. Earth has decided that we won't tolerate this kind of behavior in our region of space. Not from anyone." She looked at Daniel directly. "I'm offering you a choice, Captain Harper. You and your crew have done your part. You can stay here and assist with humanitarian efforts, or you can return to your exploration mission. No one will think less of you either way." Daniel thought about his crew, about the young Valari named Sileth who had lost her family, about the recordings Kevin had translated of Krathix raiders laughing while they hunted civilians. He thought about the dozens of other species who might be suffering the same fate right now. "We'll stay," he said. "If there are more people who need help, then we'll help them." Patricia nodded, unsurprised. "I thought you might say that. Welcome to the task force, Captain." Over the next week, Commander Brandon Wells coordinated the rebuilding efforts at Refuge Station. Human engineers worked alongside Valari survivors to restore power, atmosphere, and basic life support to the damaged sections. Ships brought in supplies, medical equipment, and construction materials. Ryan Carter found himself teaching Valari engineers about human construction techniques. Despite the language barrier and the trauma they had experienced, the Valari were eager to learn and grateful for the help. They worked tirelessly, determined to rebuild their home. Helen Foster established a field hospital in one of the repaired sections. She treated not just physical injuries, but also helped the Valari process the psychological trauma of what they had endured. Sileth became her assistant, translating and helping other survivors share their stories. One evening, Sileth asked Helen the question that had been on her mind since the human fleet arrived. "Why did so many of you come? We are just one small colony. We have nothing to offer in return for this help." Helen paused in her work and looked at the young Valari. "You don't understand humans very well yet. We didn't come because we expect payment. We came because it was the right thing to do, because you called for help and leaving you to suffer would have been unthinkable. But your people sent an entire fleet. So many ships, so many soldiers. This must cost enormous resources. It does, Helen admitted. But humanity learned something important in our history. We learned that the cost of ignoring evil is always higher than the cost of fighting it. If we had stayed home and done nothing, we would have lost something more valuable than ships or resources. We would have lost our humanity. Silith was quiet for a moment. The Krathiks thought you would be like the other species they encountered. Afraid, unwilling to fight. They made a terrible mistake. Yes, Helen agreed. They thought because we're explorers and scientists that we're weak. They didn't realize we can be both peaceful and deadly. We prefer peace, but we're very good at war when we need to be. Meanwhile, Admiral Patricia Coleman prepared her fleet for the next phase of the operation. Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Sophie Morgan had been analyzing everything they learned from the captured Krathiks prisoners. She identified 5 major Krathiks installations that held prisoners from various species. The task force would hit all 5 simultaneously, not giving the Krathiks time to mount an organized defense or harm their captives. It would be a complex operation requiring precise coordination. But Patricia was confident her people could handle it. On the bridge of the Retribution, she addressed her fleet commanders via holographic conference. Remember, our objective is liberation, not conquest. We free the prisoners, neutralize Krathiks' military assets, and establish security. We're not here to occupy their worlds, but we are here to ensure they can never do this again. The fleet departed Refuge Station 3 days later, leaving behind a reinforced garrison to protect the rebuilding colony. As they jumped to faster-than-light travel, Daniel Harper stood on the bridge of the Horizon's Edge, now integrated into the larger fleet as a scout vessel. The war against the Krathiks' dominion had truly begun. The first Krathiks world they hit was called Thessar Prime. Intelligence suggested it housed the largest prisoner camp in the Dominion, with thousands of captives from at least 7 different species. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, surrounding the planet before the Krathiks' defenders could react. Major Lisa Crawford led the ground assault. She commanded 3 companies of Marines, specially trained for urban combat and hostage rescue. They dropped from orbit in assault pods, hitting the surface like meteorites and deploying immediately upon landing. The Krathiks guards at the prison complex were unprepared for the assault. They had grown comfortable over the years, confident that no one would challenge them. That confidence died in the first 5 minutes of combat. Lisa's Marines moved through the complex with practiced efficiency. They used non-lethal weapons when possible, stunning guards rather than killing them. The mission wasn't about revenge, it was about rescue. Every minute spent fighting was a minute they weren't freeing prisoners. Building 7 is secured, one of her squad leaders reported. We've got maybe 200 prisoners here, various species. They're scared but alive. Get them to the evacuation point, Lisa ordered. Medical teams are standing by. They found the conditions horrifying. Prisoners were kept in cramped cells with minimal food and water. Many showed signs of abuse and forced labor. The Krathiks had been using them as slaves, working them until they died and then simply capturing more to replace them. One of the prisoners, a reptilian being from a species called the Tamorians, grabbed Lisa's arm as she passed. "You are human?" he asked in halting English. "Yes. We're getting you out of here." The Tamorian's eyes filled with tears. "We heard rumors that humans came to help the Valari. We thought it was just stories to give us hope." "It's not a story," Lisa assured him. "Come on, let's get you to safety." By the end of the day, over 3,000 prisoners had been evacuated from Thessar Prime. Human ships orbited the planet, providing security while medical teams treated the freed captives. Many were malnourished and injured. Some had been prisoners for years. All of them looked at their human rescuers with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. The operation at Vor Station went similarly well. Commander Jake Morrison, leading the diplomatic team, found not prisoners but rather species who were being forced to pay tribute to the Krathiks. They lived under constant threat, pay the Krathiks protection money or face destruction like the Valari. Jake met with the station's administrators, a council representing 4 different species who shared the trading hub. "The Krathiks are gone," Jake told them simply. "We've destroyed their ships and their bases in this system. You don't owe them anything anymore." The council members looked at each other nervously. One of them, an insectoid being named Zix, spoke carefully. "What do you want from us in return?" Jake smiled. "Nothing. We're not here to replace the Krathiks as your overlords. We're here to give you freedom. What you do with it is up to you." But surely you want trade agreements or bases or some form of control, another council member insisted. That is how it always works. Not with humans, Jake replied. If you want to establish trade with Earth, we'd be happy to discuss it. If you want military protection while you rebuild your own defenses, we can provide that too. But these things will be voluntary agreements between equals, not demands backed by threats. The concept seemed to confuse them. They had lived under Krathik's domination for so long that the idea of genuine freedom was hard to grasp. But as the days passed and no human demands came, they began to believe it. Admiral Patricia Coleman coordinated all 5 operations from the Retribution, monitoring reports from each task force. The pattern was consistent across every Krathik's installation. The defenders were unprepared, the prisoners were numerous, and the human forces achieved their objectives with minimal casualties. But Patricia knew the real test was coming. The Krathik's government, based on their homeworld of Krathis Major, would have to respond. They had lost ships, bases, and prisoners. Their entire system of predation and tribute was collapsing. They would either surrender or fight back with everything they had. The answer came 2 weeks into the campaign. A Krathik's fleet of over 60 ships assembled at their homeworld and began moving toward human forces. It was their entire remaining military, pulled together for one massive counterattack. Patricia studied the tactical reports with her senior officers. The Krathik's outnumbered the human task force, and they would be fighting in their own territory where they knew the terrain. They're desperate, Lieutenant Sophie Morgan observed. This is everything they have left. If they lose this battle, the Dominion is finished. Then we need to make sure they lose, Patricia said calmly. But we do it smart. We're not here to waste lives, human or otherwise. Chris, I want firing solutions that disable their ships rather than destroy them when possible. The goal is to end this war, not commit genocide. Chris Jensen nodded. Understood, Admiral. We'll target engines and weapon systems primarily. The 2 fleets met in the space between 2 solar systems, far from any inhabited worlds. The Krathik's came in aggressively, trying to use their numbers to overwhelm the human formation. But Patricia had fought in fleet actions before, and she knew how to turn numbers against an enemy. The human ships spread out, using their superior speed and coordination to avoid getting surrounded. They picked off Krathik's vessels on the flanks, drawing the main enemy force into pursuit. Then, when the Krathik's were overextended, the human fleet turned and hit them from multiple angles at once. It wasn't the quick victory of Refuge Station. This battle lasted for hours, with both sides taking significant damage. 3 human destroyers were lost, and the Retribution itself took hits that knocked out 2 of its main weapon batteries. But the Krathik's losses were catastrophic. By the time the Krathik's commander finally signaled surrender, his fleet had been reduced to less than 20 functional ships. The rest were destroyed or disabled, drifting in space with their crews awaiting rescue. Patricia accepted the surrender and ordered medical ships forward to assist the wounded from both sides. She took no pleasure in the victory. Every death, human or Krathik's, weighed on her conscience. But she also knew this had been necessary. On the horizon's edge, Daniel Harper and his crew had fought as part of the battle line. Their small ship had performed scout duties, identifying targets and coordinating fire from larger vessels. They had survived without major damage, though Greg Palmer's hands were shaking from the stress of combat. Is it over? Amy Sullivan asked quietly. This part is, Daniel replied, but there's still a lot of work to do. He was right. With the Krathik's military defeated, the task of rebuilding began. Human ships moved through Krathik's territory, establishing temporary administrations and working with local populations to form new governments. The goal was to create stability without permanent occupation. Kevin Brooks found himself working with a team of linguists and diplomats, helping various species communicate with each other and with humans. Many of the freed prisoners wanted to return home, but some had no homes to return to. Their worlds had been destroyed or abandoned years ago. The solution came from an unexpected source. The Valari, still rebuilding their own colony at Refuge Station, offered to host refugees from other species. They had learned firsthand what it meant to be victims of the Krathik's, and they wanted to help others who had suffered the same fate. Sileth, now working as a liaison between humans and Valari, helped organize the relief efforts. She had grown close to Helen Foster during her recovery, and now she worked tirelessly to help others heal from their trauma. We were helpless when the Krathik's came, Sileth told Helen one evening. But you humans showed us that being peaceful doesn't mean accepting victimization. You can love peace and still fight to protect it. Helen smiled. You're learning, and you're becoming strong in your own way, not through violence but through compassion and determination. The war had lasted 6 months from start to finish. The Krathix Dominion, which had terrorized multiple species for decades, had been dismantled completely. Their military was destroyed, their government dissolved, and their former subjects were free. But the impact went far beyond the Krathix. Every species in the region had watched what happened. They saw how humanity responded to the distress call. They saw the overwhelming force deployed to protect peaceful aliens. And they understood the message. Humanity would not tolerate predators in their space. 8 months after the first distress call from Refuge Station, the rebuilt colony held a ceremony. The twisted metal and broken structures had been replaced with new buildings that blended Valari architectural beauty with human engineering strength. Gardens bloomed in biodomes, and the spiral design that had been shattered was now restored, and even more magnificent than before. Representatives from dozens of species attended. Some were former Krathix prisoners who wanted to thank humanity in person. Others were diplomats curious about these humans who had appeared on the galactic stage with such force. And some were simply there to witness history. The ceremony took place in the station's central plaza, a large open space with a transparent dome showing the stars above. Seelith stood at the podium, wearing traditional Valari robes that her people wore for important occasions. She had been chosen to speak on behalf of all the survivors. We called for help, Seelith began, her voice carrying through the plaza's speakers. We sent a message into the darkness, hoping someone would hear. We did not know if anyone would come. We did not know if anyone would care about a small colony of peaceful people far from the centers of power. She paused, looking at the human delegation seated in the front rows. Daniel Harper was there with his crew from the horizon's edge. Admiral Patricia Coleman sat beside Fleet Admiral Nicholas Grant, who had traveled from Earth specifically for this occasion. Hundreds of human soldiers, engineers, and medical personnel filled the other seats. But you came, Seelith continued, her voice stronger now, not with empty promises or political discussions. You came with ships and soldiers. You came ready to fight for people you barely knew. And when you won, you did not conquer us. You helped us rebuild and then prepared to leave, asking nothing in return. The crowd was silent, listening to every word. Even the human delegation seemed moved by Seelith's speech. The Krathix thought we were weak because we valued peace. They thought you humans would be the same. They believed that kindness meant cowardice and that compassion was a flaw. They were wrong. You showed the galaxy that the greatest strength is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Seelith gestured to a memorial wall that had been constructed near the plaza. It bore the names of every Valari who had died in the attack, nearly 4,000 individuals. But it also bore the names of the 6 human soldiers who had died during the liberation campaigns. These humans did not die for conquest or glory. They died so that others could live free. That is true nobility. That is true strength. After Seelith finished, Ambassador Charles Bennett stepped up to speak. He represented Earth at the Galactic Council, the loose organization of older spacefaring species that governed interstellar relations. The Council had been remarkably quiet during the entire Krathix situation, neither helping nor hindering human operations. The Galactic Council has asked me to convey their appreciation for humanity's actions, Charles said carefully. They recognize that the Krathix situation required intervention and are pleased it was resolved peacefully. Patricia Coleman, sitting in the audience, barely suppressed a snort. Peacefully, as if 6 months of military operations could be called peaceful. But she understood the politics. The Council was trying to save face after their decades of ignoring the Krathix problem. Charles continued his diplomatic speech, talking about cooperation and mutual understanding. But everyone in the plaza knew the truth. The Galactic Council hadn't acted because they didn't want to risk their own ships and soldiers. Humanity had done what needed to be done, and now the Council was trying to take partial credit. When the ceremony ended, Daniel Harper found himself approached by several alien diplomats. They all wanted to establish formal relations with Earth, to ensure they were on good terms with these powerful newcomers. One diplomat from a species called the Zentari was particularly insistent. We would be honored to host a human embassy on our homeworld, she said, and we would like to discuss mutual defense agreements. Daniel smiled politely. I'm just a ship captain. You'll need to talk to Ambassador Bennett about diplomatic matters. But I can tell you this. Humanity doesn't seek to dominate anyone. We just want to explore, learn, and make sure peaceful species can live without fear. And if we are threatened by aggressors, as the Valari were, then call for help, Daniel said simply. We'll come. That night, Admiral Patricia Coleman held a private dinner with her senior officers. They gathered in one of the station's restaurants, now reopened with both Valari and human cuisine available. The mood was relaxed, a stark contrast to the tense months of military operations. What's next for the fleet? Commander Jake Morrison asked. Patricia sipped her drink before answering. We're establishing permanent patrol routes through this region, not as occupiers but as peacekeepers. Any species that wants our protection can request it. Those that don't are free to decline. Some of the council members aren't happy about that, Lieutenant Sophie Morgan observed. They think we're overstepping. They can think what they want, Patricia replied. They had decades to deal with the Krathiks and did nothing. We solved the problem in 6 months. If they don't like how we did it, they should have acted sooner. Chris Jensen raised his glass. To the Valari, and to all the species we freed. May they never need our help again. But may we always be ready if they do. They all drank to that. Meanwhile, on the horizon's edge, Kevin Brooks was training a group of Valari volunteers in communications protocols. The Valari were setting up their own defense network, not to wage war but to ensure they could call for help if needed. They had learned a harsh lesson about the dangers of being completely defenseless. Helen Foster was training Valari medical personnel, sharing human techniques and learning Valari methods in return. The cross-cultural exchange was producing innovations that benefited both species. Ryan Carter was helping design new defensive systems for the station. He worked with Valari engineers to create shields and early warning sensors that could detect hostile ships long before they arrived. The work of rebuilding wasn't just physical. It was about giving the Valari and other survivor species the tools they needed to protect themselves in the future. 3 weeks after the ceremony, the Horizon's Edge prepared to depart. Most of the human military fleet had already left, returning to their regular duties. Only a small garrison remained to provide security while the region stabilized. Daniel stood in the station's observation deck with Seleth, looking out at his ship docked nearby. You're leaving, Seleth said. It wasn't a question. Our mission is exploration, Daniel replied. We have a galaxy to discover. But we'll come back to visit, and if you ever need us, just call. The Valari will not forget what humanity did for us, Seleth promised. And we will make sure the galaxy does not forget either. The story of how humans answered our distress call will be told for generations. Daniel smiled. Just make sure you tell it accurately. We're not heroes or saviors. We're just people who believe that helping others is more important than playing it safe. That, Seleth said softly, is exactly what makes you heroes. The Horizon's Edge departed the next morning. As the ship pulled away from the station, Linda Martinez picked up a new signal on the communications channel. It was faint, coming from a system about 3 weeks away, a distress call from a species called the Tamorians, reporting pirate attacks on their frontier colonies. Daniel looked at his crew. They were tired from months of combat and rescue operations. They deserved rest, but he also saw the determination in their eyes, the same resolve that had brought them to Refuge Station all those months ago. Amy, plot a course, Daniel ordered. Let's see what we can do to help. The crew moved to their stations without hesitation. This was who they were now. Not just explorers mapping the stars, but guardians watching over those who needed protection. As the Horizon's Edge accelerated toward the new distress call, Daniel reflected on everything that had changed. Humanity had proven itself to the galaxy, not through conquest but through compassion backed by overwhelming force. They had shown that peaceful species could stand up to predators, that kindness was not weakness, and that the strong had a responsibility to protect the vulnerable. Other species were watching now, learning from humanity's example. Some would follow that example and become better. Others would fear human power and reconsider their own aggressive policies. And a few would inevitably try to test humanity's resolve, thinking the Krathic situation was a one-time event. They would learn, as the Krathiks had learned, that humanity's fury when protecting the innocent was relentless and absolute. You could attack human colonies and they might negotiate. You could compete with human trade and they would bargain fairly. But if you harmed those under their protection, if you preyed on the peaceful and turned suffering into sport, then humanity would come for you with everything they had. The message had been sent. The galaxy had received it, and in stations and colonies across dozens of worlds, species that had lived in fear of predators could finally sleep peacefully, knowing that if they called for help, someone would answer. The horizon's edge jumped to faster-than-light travel, racing toward the next distress call. Behind them, Hope Station shone like a beacon, a promise that humanity kept its word. And across human space, fleets,